Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. I am your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very accomplished woman leader from the US, Vipula Gandhi. Vipula, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ashutosh. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Vipula is the managing partner and head of US enterprise Gallup. She's the only woman business line leader of Gallup in 85 years. She's a board member of the Peter Drucker Foundation, and in her earlier avatar, she was a banker. So, Vipula, let's talk Gallup today. From public opinion polls to a vast array of consulting services, how has Gallup evolved since it was founded in 1935?
Ashutosh, thank you for the question. Gallup's founder, Dr. George Gallup, he had a famous quote that went like, there are 5 billion ways to lead a life, and we should study them all.
Okay.
And that is what exactly he did for the vast majority of his very legendary career as the founding father of the modern polling methodologies. And, he had a deep belief that representing the hearts, minds, and lived experiences of Americans to leaders was a very important activity, to improve the effectiveness of the leaders, but also to maintain a delicate democracy. And it's Dr. Gallup's integrity and his independence that has made Gallup amongst the most famous and trusted brands in the world today. Absolutely. But 85 years have passed, Ashutosh, and we are still continuing to steward that great mission. And we have since obviously evolved, and his work was centered on American public. We now work globally with organizations, and my business line actually helps drive organic growth based on our deep understanding of human nature and behavior, and thus the very practice of management. So we consult with organizations like Accenture, Mars, Disney, Microsoft, and even smaller ones, right, which are interested in building the best workplaces. And since then, Ashutosh, we've also expanded our efforts through the Gallup World Poll. Basically, we measure 99% of the world's representative population on everything important to humankind. So we work with ILO, World Bank, UN, corporates, but it's just an amazing way to take Dr. Gallup's vision forward.
Amazing. So, when I was in school, one used to go and earn 10 rupees for a questionnaire by going around asking questions. And that used to be on a little wooden notepad, and we go from individual to individual. Today, technology must have changed everything. I'd love to get your perspective on how has the entire process of polling changed because of technology?
So technology has been such an enabler, Ashutosh. Yeah. But again, it depends on the penetration of technology in various countries and various group of people that you're trying to get feedback from. So there are some countries in the world where mobile phone is actually a great way to get through people. But then there are some demographics where it's actually you need a mail survey. So it's our ability to understand how to ensure that we are doing the analytics based on the true and best way to collect data and information from individuals before we make a premise. Ashutosh, it's extremely important that we get our premise right, because if we are getting premise wrong, then the more you work on it, the worse things get. So using technology, but ensuring that we are being scientific and predictive, and using technology where it helps, but sometimes going back to the tried and tested methods to get the true feedback. And we are truly committed to getting the right information from individuals.
Absolutely incredible. So, when I was reading about you and Gallup, you work in several areas which are absolutely incredible. I mean, from culture transformation to organizational effectiveness, employee experience, customer centricity, and leadership. So today in my discussion with you, I've decided that we'll talk of 2 or 3 areas. Let's first talk about the Great Resignation. The whole world is talking about it, and this seems to become very popular post the pandemic. What are some of the reasons for these resignations?
So some of them are facts and some of them are hypotheses. So just to get some data back, BLS just released its survey last week, and it informs us that 3% people quit voluntarily their job in the month of September. Wow. Now, 3% a month, multiply that by 12. Can we all build organizations at 36% attrition? Okay. So the great resignation is here. Now, why is that? First and foremost, it's data back that there are more retirements than ever. Now, why are people retiring? Could it be because of stock market performance, which is doing well? People have decided they don't want to continue doing what they were doing. The pandemic maybe gave them a way to think about life differently. Or this has been a big challenge for organizations. Retirements have increased. Also, there has been a pent-up demand because think about it, since COVID started, everybody wanted some kind of a financial security, and staying in a job was better than trying to find a new one in difficult circumstances. Who knew how COVID would pan out in March of 2020? So there's a pent-up demand. People haven't resigned for a long time, so it's time to kind of build that up. Also, it is clear, Ashutosh, with your experience in mind, that we have had a chance to reflect. Correct. Is this what we really want? Is this serves our purpose? More importantly, latest data suggests, Ashutosh, that this is a best time to find job. If you look back, when people say, is this a good time to find a job? There's a majority, 72% of the population said yes. Wow. So the ebbs and flows of the economy about the job availability out there is very much a challenge. And the last thing I'll mention is there are certain industries and jobs that are suffering more from great resignation than others. And those are the jobs where pay and benefits are just not good enough. And, as leaders of organizations and countries, this is where the automation and AI comes in. Do we really need to have jobs where people are not earning living wage and don't have basic benefits like healthcare? So all this together, in my view, is what's leading to the great resignation. But I always make a comment, is this a great resignation or is this a great discontent? Wow.
So, it has always been said that people leave bad bosses, not organizations. So today, what you are telling me is that resignations are happening for factors which are beyond, and 3% a month of attrition. Can you, not just a company, I wonder how a nation would survive with such an amazing amount of attrition. But another thing that's happening, Vipula, is this whole thing of work from home. How are companies adapting to that? And how are employees or people adapting to a situation where there's no networking and no social connect?
Great question, Ashutosh. So remote work, now called hybrid work, organizations need to ensure that they have their own unique plan for remote/hybrid work based on their customer expectations, their organization expectations, their team's expectations, there's individual employee expectations. The challenge is that there's no one solution for everyone, right? But we all understand that although remote work options are great for employee engagement, we know that when people work from home 2 or 3 days a week, they're more likely to be engaged and can have a life well lived. Right. So it's a good thing. However, it's actually is hugely challenging for organizations, especially who live in the old world of management. Because once, it's not about people in the office and I see you working from 9 a.m. till 7 p.m. and hence you're a great worker. Now we have no option but to trust our team members. We have to have ability to clarify expectations and priorities more effectively. We should be able to coach remotely. And also, most importantly, how do we create an outcome-based accountability? A lot has been written about proximity bias, that, we as human beings, we suffer from hundreds of biases. One of them is, if I'm working with you on a daily basis, I'm more likely to like you and to promote you. So how do we ensure that we are not falling into those trap of biases and working through it? For individuals, well, again, this is the idea, Ashutosh, that we can no longer continue to treat our team as a team, like a group of people. Now it's all about personalization and individualization, and how do you meet and appreciate the need of every individual differently. Because think about how pandemic has affected us, Ashutosh. I mean, if you live in New York in a one-bedroom apartment, sharing it with your roommate, versus if you have a suburban house with a dog, with no young kids, versus a young mother with kids 3 and 5 years old, right? I mean, the challenges are so varied.
Correct.
And how we need to appreciate that pandemic has told us that things are very individual and very situational, and how we need to reach out in this different world, and how to ensure that we live in an outcome-focused performance management where it doesn't matter where you are, as long as you're performing for the organization, that should be recognized.
Wow. And I was also reading an article which said that the pandemic has affected or beginning to affect mental health at work. I'm sure you've done a lot of research. I'd love to get your perspective.
Ashutosh, the mental health pandemic is already here.
Okay.
So as we think about getting out of COVID pandemic, CDC in the US has said that mental health cases have multiplied by 4 in the last few years. And the stress and the worry, are the two things we measure. And, in 2019, January, we asked people, how many of them actually experience worry a lot of the previous day. And 36% said, yes, they experience worry. And 44% said, Ashutosh, that they had a lot of stress yesterday. Can you imagine? That's like nearly 1 in 2 people, right, that you meet who is reporting that they had a lot of stress the previous day. Can we imagine how it affects the decisions that we make, how it affects our family life and our overall life, so to say? And when COVID struck, the numbers went to nearly 60% people reporting that. Because, can you imagine pandemic we have never had this kind of a financial, health and physical and social anxiety all rolled into one. So 60% people started reporting that. Now, even after 2021, now we have vaccinations, we have booster approval, we have COVID pills. Still, the stress levels are extremely high, and they are stunningly shocking, really, for leaders to think about. Because the higher the stress, the more likely you are to have burnout. And the more burnout you have, more likely you get anxiety, depression, panic disorders. So as leaders, we have to be extremely careful about ensuring that we are offering a role. And no longer we can say that I'll only take care of you when you're in the office, right? I don't care about what happens to you when you go home.
Right.
You are the same person.
Correct.
So the mental health challenges are here. And as leaders, we cannot ignore them. We need to ensure that we are taking care of the holistic well-being of our team members.
Fascinating. And is this across all age groups, or is it being seen more in one particular set of people?
So we have seen the data. So I love the fact that, you tell in God we trust, all others must bring data. So here I am bringing data to you.
Yes.
Young people under 40 and women have much higher stress and worry levels than other age groups. And think about it, caregiver responsibility, women, a lot work falls on their shoulders. We all went back, they were schooling from home and, kind of getting used to that, and being a career woman and have young kids, it's a whole different level of stress. Younger people also, Ashutosh, they have likely to have younger kids, likely to be not, much advanced in their career. So a little bit more job insecurity than other age groups are some of the hypotheses. But younger people and women, Ashutosh, are struggling more with it than other age groups.
Amazing. So Vipula, let's now move to the next part of our conversation, which is on culture. And again, you've done a lot of work in this area, and you are more in the US, but your organization is global. How do you define culture for an organization?
I always start, Ashutosh, by saying that culture is the most oft-used, abused, misused, misaligned word that there is. And it always comes into focus because everybody understands that culture helps unlock the organization's potential. Everybody understands that. But how and what is it? I have seen, by the way, just to mention that I've seen people talking about culture the moment there are challenging obstacles. So think about losing market share, people quitting, stars leaving, declining engagement scores, eroding brand. That's when people think about culture. Now, you ask me, what is culture? So, every organization has an identity, and that identity is built of three things: purpose, why you exist; brand, how are you differentiated in the market; and culture, how things get done, how work gets done. The challenge with culture, and why it is an ambiguous concept that people find it difficult to put their arms around, is because it's actually an unwritten operating manual that informs people what is valued in the organization. So, how do we know what culture is? It's really a sum of everything that you hear in the organization, right? What do the influential and powerful leaders say? What values do we claim are important to us? What actions we observe? Who gets promoted? Is that person who is not really a good human being and is getting promoted? Does that say you value performance more than, being kind and caring towards team members? Basically, what is rewarded and what is punished. So these are some of messages, and it's absolutely important that we are able to define what our culture is, because you and me can say we both have a culture, but think about it, it's very different, right? So how do we define it? How do we ensure that we are deploying that culture in a way that the organization understands is important? How to ensure that we are aligned behind it? And then how do we sustain it? So although when you think about culture, it sounds ambiguous, actually it's not. You can very clearly put some parameters, but keep in mind, you can't become somebody else. Like you can't say, I want to be Google, I want to be Meta. The fact is that your best culture already exists in your organization today. And as leaders, we should be able to find that and replicate that versus trying to be somebody, because cultures are inherently unique and they are complex, but they don't need to be as ambiguous as they generally are.
Well said, well said. But, one of the questions I've often grappled with is that when you talk of an 85-year-old company like Gallup, culture has evolved over the years. When you talk of the Googles and the Metas of the world, over the years, across multiple countries, culture has evolved. How does a startup entrepreneur or a startup founder start to build culture?
So the way to start is really, we are a research-based consulting firm, and we always start with what's the truth? Let's find the truth first. So the first and foremost is the workplace is changing at a dizzying pace. Ashutosh, when you and me started, we valued different things that what today's generation values. And what we have found is that, paycheck is still important. It's the foundation, but it's a hygiene factor.
Correct.
It's the purpose, why we exist, that matters more. There's a move away from satisfaction with my office work environment, with my commute, my cafeteria. It's all about my development. How are you going to develop me? You are not my boss. You are my coach. Think about sports analogy. And you're not going to do that by once in a year annual review. I need frequent and quality ongoing conversations. Think about the kind of instant feedback we get on social media. Generation, our new people, generations, even millennials, they're no longer as new as they once were, but they want instant feedback. Correct. And it's no longer about my weakness, it's about my strengths, and it's no longer just about my job, it's about my life, because life and job are no longer different. Now, these changes, Ashutosh, were already in the offing for the last 5-7 years. But the pandemic has kind of accentuated the speed at which more and more people wanted that. So I'm not a millennial, but I have also changed over a period of time. I have evolved. Now, I have learned that purpose is critical. So now that startups have to first understand, what do people value? And once they have done that, they need to build an employee experience, the whole gamut from how do you attract, hire, to how do you exit based on that. Now, if you think about a time when in the 60s and 70s, and Ashutosh, people wanted, they wanted some rational, they wanted pay, they wanted, some rational things like give me my benefits. 1990s, things changed, and there people wanted more of, do I have what I need to do my work right? Do I have the support I needed? Do I have teamwork? Do I have growth? Now, the most advanced organizations that we work with have realized that you have to find yourself caring for the individual behind the employee. Right. So everything from well-being to diversity, equity, inclusion, ESG, it's all about that. The problem that we have is a lot of organizations are stuck in their context of 70s and 60s. And although the study of management had made huge progress, the practice of management is still lacking. So startups have this opportunity, to ensure that you use these findings and build an appropriate culture where talent wants to work and wants to stay.
Fascinating. So Vipula, I have time for one more question, and I'm trying to debate what to ask you. But I'm going to now move to the incredible role you play at the Peter Drucker Foundation. You are a board member, and I think Peter Drucker as an individual is probably one of the most well-recognized management gurus in the world. Tell me a little bit about this foundation and your role as a board member.
So the foundation was established, Ashutosh, just to ensure that we are furthering Peter Drucker's mission. Just like you, I studied Peter Drucker in college, and I'm, in awe of that leader who actually was so ahead of his time, Ashutosh. Peter Drucker spoke about stakeholders in the 1960s. What we talk about ESG today, he was talking about in the 60s, saying that you have to think about all your stakeholders. He's the person who spoke about strengths and ensuring that the way you run your organization is not to find what is wrong with you. You run an organization to see what your strengths are, and you build upon those strengths, whether it is as an organization in the market with your customer or as an individual. You cannot be weakness fixing. So the foundation's job is to ensure we continue to do that. The foundation has partnerships with Wall Street Journal, with S&P Index, where we are trying to bring Peter Drucker principles to organizations, talking about, ensuring that you are listening to your customers, delivering great service, not forgetting employees, not forgetting social aspects. So how to run a holistic organization, and of course, bring to individuals, organizations, what they can do to become better. So I was invited earlier this year to join the board. So still I have a long way to go, but absolutely committed to make this world a better place using both Peter Drucker and Gallup principles.
Amazing, amazing. Vipula, on that note, I just want to say thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you for talking to me about Gallup, about in the incredible process that we are seeing about resignations and what is causing these resignations. Thank you for talking to me about culture, and more importantly, about startup culture. And thank you for sharing with me about the Peter Drucker Foundation. Good luck in your role as a board member, and we look forward to seeing some amazing contributions from you as a board member. Thank you again, and good luck.
Thank you, Ashutosh. Pleasure to be here. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.